Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was trained by Knuckle Duster and Principal Nezu. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind sweeping across the rooftop was surprisingly cold for a spring afternoon, though perhaps that was just the sudden chill of reality setting into Izuku Midoriya's bones. The city of Muzurifu stretched out below them, a sprawling labyrinth of glass, steel, and concrete, glittering under the late afternoon sun. It was a world of heroes and villains, a comic book fantasy brought to life by the advent of quirks. But standing on this roof, looking at the emaciated, hollow-eyed man who had just deflated from the towering symbol of peace into a coughing, blood-spitting shadow, Izuku felt as though the vibrant colors of that world had suddenly been washed away into a dull, unforgiving gray. Pro heroes are always risking their lives, All Might said, his voice stripped of its booming, theatrical bravado. He wiped a trail of blood from his chin, his sunken blue eyes staring out at the skyline. Some villains just can't be beaten without powers. So no, I honestly don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. The words dropped like anvil weights onto Izuku's chest. He had spent his entire life waiting for this moment, waiting to ask his idol the one question that had burned in his heart since he was 4 years old, sitting in a doctor's office holding a plastic All Might action figure. Can someone without a quirk be like you? If you want to help people, All Might continued, turning toward the stairwell door, his baggy clothes billowing around his skeletal frame, you can always become a police officer. They get a lot of crap because the heroes capture most of the villains, but it's a fine profession. It's not bad to dream, young man. But you have to make sure your dreams are attainable. Realistic. Understand? The heavy metal door clicked shut, leaving Izuku alone on the roof. He stood there for a long time. His hands, still clutching the straps of his bright yellow backpack, were trembling. In his right pocket rested a severely burnt and waterlogged notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future number 13. Just 20 minutes ago, All Might had signed it. It had felt like a holy relic then. Now, its weight against his thigh felt like a cruel joke. Realistic. Izuku let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like a sob. The tears didn't come though. Instead, a hollow, echoing numbness spread from his chest down to his fingertips. For 10 years, he had endured the bullying, the explosive burns on his shoulders, the pitying looks from his mother, and the quiet mockery of his teachers. He had endured it all because he believed that if he just tried hard enough, if he just had enough heart, he could smile and save people. But a quirkless boy with a notebook wasn't a hero. He was a liability. Izuku turned slowly and made his way down the stairs. The descent felt agonizing, each step a further descent into a mundane, powerless reality. He didn't know how long he walked the streets of Muzurifu. The bustling crowds, the neon signs of the shopping districts, the distant wail of police sirens, it all blurred together into a muted hum. He was just a ghost haunting a world meant for gods. Boom! The ground beneath Izuku's red sneakers trembled. The sudden shockwave snapped him out of his reverie. Plumes of thick, black smoke were rising into the orange sky a few blocks away in the Tatooine shopping district. Sirens were blaring, louder and closer now. A villain attack, his brain supplied automatically. His feet twitched. I need to go see, maybe I can take notes. Izuku stopped himself. He squeezed his eyes shut, his fists clenching at his sides. No. Stop it. It's over. You're not a hero. Yet, despite his internal reprimand, the habit of a lifetime was too strong to break instantly. Before he fully realized what he was doing, he was jogging toward the smoke. He told himself he was just taking a detour on his way home. That was all. By the time he reached the shopping district, a massive crowd had formed, kept at bay by a haphazard police barricade. Fires raged in the alleyways, licking the brick walls of the boutiques and cafes. The air tasted of ozone, sulfur, and something sickly sweet, like burnt caramel. Izuku pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his green eyes scanning the scene. The pro-heroes were already there. Death Arms, standing helplessly by the perimeter. Kamui Woods, his wooden branches useless against the roaring flames. Empty Lady, complaining about the narrow street preventing her from using her gigantification quirk. Why aren't they doing anything? Izuku thought, his analytical mind booting up despite his depression. Kamui's wood will ignite, yes, but Death Arms has the physical strength to cause a shockwave and disperse the fire. Empty Lady could shrink, enter the alley, and grab the hostage, then grow to shield them from the blast. Why are they just waiting? Then, Izuku saw the villain. It was a shifting, amorphous mass of dark green sludge, writhing with erratic, terrifying power. Izuku's breath hitched. It was the same villain from under the bridge. The one All Might had captured. He dropped the bottles, Izuku realized with sickening horror. When I grabbed his leg, he dropped the bottles. This is my fault. The sludge was violently thrashing, but at its center, struggling wildly, was a hostage. Ash blonde hair. Crimson eyes wide with uncharacteristic, suffocating terror. Kaken. Bakugo was firing off massive explosions from his palms, trying to blast his way out of the liquid prison, but the sludge just absorbed the impact, reforming instantly. The explosions were what was causing the fires, ripping apart the storefronts, and keeping the heroes at bay. The heroes were shouting at Bakugo to hold on, waiting for a hero with a suitable quirk to arrive. They're waiting, Izuku realized, the horror deepening. They're waiting for someone else to fix it. But Kaken is suffocating now. Bakugo's eyes locked onto Izuku in the crowd. For a fraction of a second, the aggressive, arrogant facade of Katsuki Bakugo shattered, revealing a terrified 14-year-old boy pleading for help. Izuku didn't think. He didn't analyze. He didn't remember All Might's words on the rooftop. His legs moved on their own. He ducked under the police tape, ignoring the shouts of the officers and the startled gasp of Death Arms. He sprinted full tilt into the blazing alleyway, the heat searing his face. Idiot! Stop! You'll get yourself killed! Death Arms roared. Izuku couldn't hear him. The world had narrowed down to the sludge and the terrifyingly stilling form of his childhood bully. He ripped his yellow backpack off his shoulders and hurled it with everything he had. The heavy bag unzipped midair, a metal pencil case flying out and striking the sludge villain directly in its bulging yellow eye. Gah! The villain shrieked, its grip loosening for a microsecond. Bakugo gasped for air, his coughing violently shaking his frame. Deku? What the hell are you doing here? I don't know! Izuku screamed, his hands tearing frantically at the vile, foul-smelling liquid. It was like trying to dig through wet concrete. It wouldn't yield. My legs just moved. You looked like you needed saving. The sludge villain recovered quickly, its eye reforming as a massive tendril of liquid muck reared up like a striking cobra. You little brat. I'll absorb you both. Izuku stared up at the descending mass of sludge. This was it. He had no quirk. He had no strength. He was going to die right here in this burning alley, and it wouldn't even matter. Thwack. The sound was sickeningly loud, like a baseball bat striking a side of beef. Izuku didn't get hit. Instead, a massive blur of motion slammed into the space between him and the sludge villain. A heavy boot, reinforced with steel, planted itself firmly on the asphalt. Hold your breath, kid, a gravelly, impossibly deep voice barked. Before Izuku could process the command, the newcomer moved with terrifying, calculated brutality. It was a man, massive and broad-shouldered, wearing a tattered trench coat and a strange mask over the lower half of his heavily scarred face. On his hands were thick, heavy brass knuckles, sparking with raw, uninsulated electricity. The man didn't use a flashy quirk. He didn't shout the name of a super move. He just punched. The brass knuckles slammed directly into the sludge villain's other eye with the force of a freight train. The electricity discharged in a blinding blue arc. The sludge didn't just ripple, it boiled, shrieking in agony as the high-voltage current surged through its liquid body, disrupting its physical cohesion. Liquid bodies rely on a central nervous cluster to maintain surface tension. The scarred man grunted, his voice calm amidst the chaos. He didn't stop moving. He grabbed the screaming villain by a solidifying tendril, twisted his hips, and delivered a devastating knee strike into a specific pocket of the sludge that looked slightly darker than the rest. Crunch! Something inside the sludge actually broke. The villain let out a gargling wail, its entire form shuddering before it lost its grip on Bakugo completely. The explosive teen tumbled to the ground, gasping violently for air, coated in foul-smelling mucus. The villain tried to rear up again, desperate to strike back, but the scarred man was already there. He pulled a small, heavy canister from his trench coat, pulled the pin with his teeth, and jammed it directly into the center of the villain's mass. Eat flash, scum. The man grabbed Izuku by the collar of his uniform, hauled Bakugo up by his belt, and threw both teenagers backward just as the canister detonated. It wasn't an explosive. It was an industrial-grade flashbang and concussive grenade. The blast of blinding light and deafening sound ripped the air from Izuku's lungs. The concussive wave hit the liquid villain at point-blank range, instantly atomizing its remaining surface tension. The sludge splattered against the alley walls in 1,000 inert, helpless droplets. Silence fell over the alley, save for the crackle of the surrounding fires. Izuku lay on his back, his ears ringing, his chest heaving. Beside him, Bakugo was throwing up onto the pavement. Heavy, methodical footsteps approached. The scarred man stood over them, his trench coat billowing in the heat of the fires. He looked down at the splattered remains of the villain, then looked at the two boys. The pro-heroes finally snapped out of their stupor, rushing into the alley. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Death Arms shouted, pointing an accusatory finger at the man. "You can't just use your quirk and interfere with an active hostage situation. That's illegal vigilantism." The man slowly turned his head to look at Death Arms. The glare in his eyes was so profoundly cold, so completely devoid of respect, that the pro-hero actually took a step back. "Quirk?" The man's gravelly voice carried over the crackling fires. He held up his brass knuckles, tapping them against his thigh. "I didn't use a quirk, you spandex-wearing fraud. I used a taser and a magnesium core stun grenade." "Read a book." Kamui Wood stepped forward, offended. "Now see here, we were waiting for an opening. You were waiting for an excuse," the man interrupted, his voice rising into a terrifying growl. He stepped toward the heroes, and despite being outnumbered, he dominated the space. "You had a hostage dying of asphyxiation. 4 minutes of oxygen deprivation leads to permanent brain damage. You stood here for 6. If I hadn't stepped in, you'd be scraping that kid off the pavement for a funeral. You're not heroes. You're mascots." The pro-heroes bristled, faces flushing with rage and embarrassment, but none of them moved to arrest him. There was something wild and untamed about the man, a predator's aura that made the flashy heroes instinctively back down. The man scoffed in disgust, turning his back on them. He crouched down in front of Izuku, who scrambled backward slightly, his heart hammering against his ribs. The man's eyes, weathered and hard, studied Izuku. For a second, Izuku thought he was going to get praised. He's going to tell me I was brave. He's going to tell me I have the heart of a hero. Instead, the man reached out and forcefully poked Izuku in the center of his chest. "You," the man rumbled. "What the hell was that?" Izuku blinked. I tried to save him." "You tried to commit suicide," the man corrected harshly. "You ran into an active combat zone, against a fluid-based opponent immune to blunt force trauma, armed with nothing but a middle school backpack. What was the plan? Smother him with homework?" Izuku flushed, looking down at his hands. "I didn't have a plan. My legs just moved." "Heart," the man spat the word like it was poison. "That's what they sell you on TV. Just have enough heart, and it'll all work out." "Bullshit. Heart gets you killed. Heart makes you a liability. If you're going to step into the ring, kid, you use this." He tapped a heavy, scarred finger against Izuku's temple. "Brains keep you alive. You don't have a weapon, you don't have a plan, you don't step in. You just gave the villain a second hostage to use as leverage." Tears pricked the corners of Izuku's eyes. It was All Might's rejection all over again, just delivered with brass knuckles instead of a smile. He was useless. The man stood up, adjusting his heavy coat. He glanced over at Bakugo, who was glaring daggers at him, pride warring with nausea. "And you, firecracker. Learn to control your panic. You gave him the ammunition to keep the perimeter secure." Pathetic. Without another word, the man turned and walked away, melting into the shadows of the alley before the police could even think to stop him. Izuku sat there amidst the rubble. A police officer came over, gently pulling him to his feet and guiding him toward the paramedics. As he walked, Izuku didn't notice his burnt notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future number 13, slipped from his torn pocket and land in the ash-covered street. High above the city, in a room bathed in the blue glow of dozens of holographic monitors, a small, immaculately dressed creature took a delicate sip of Darjeeling tea. Principal Nezu of UA High School adjusted himself in his oversized leather chair. To the uninitiated, he looked like a bizarre amalgamation of a mouse, a bear, and a dog, dressed in a tailored waistcoat. To those who knew him, he was the smartest, and arguably most dangerous, being in Japan. Nezu's dark, beady eyes were fixated on monitor screen 4. It was displaying a raw, unedited feed from a traffic camera overlooking the Tatooine shopping district. He had watched the entire incident unfold. He watched the pro-heroes cower. He watched the explosive blonde boy panic. He watched his old acquaintance, Iwao Aguro, better known in the underground as the brutal vigilante knuckle-duster, dismantle a B-rank villain with nothing but street smarts and hardware. But most importantly, Nezu had watched the green-haired boy. Nezu rewound the footage, playing the boy's charge in slow motion. He saw the pure, unadulterated terror on the boy's face. He saw the physical frailty. Yet he also saw the throwing of the backpack. Nezu zoomed in on the trajectory of the pencil case. Fascinating, Nezu thought, his snout twitching. The throw wasn't random. The boy aimed specifically for the villain's psychotic eye movements. He recognized, even in a state of panic, that a fluid body's only solid, vulnerable points are its sensory organs. It was a micro-calculation that seasoned pros often missed in the heat of battle. Nezu's eyes drifted to another screen, linked to a police drone hovering over the aftermath of the scene. The drone's camera panned over the debris and caught a glimpse of a small, charred notebook lying in the gutter. Nezu pressed a button on his desk console. "Hound dog, my friend. I need a favor. There is a police cleanup crew at Sector 4G. Instruct them to secure a burnt notebook from the scene and have it couriered to my office immediately. Priority 1. Rough? A notebook, sir?" Hound Dog's gruff voice came over the intercom. "Yes. I believe I may have just found something exceedingly rare." 2 hours later, the notebook sat on Nezu's mahogany desk, enclosed in an evidence bag. Nezu carefully extracted it with white cotton gloves, mindful of the fragile, waterlogged pages. He opened to the first page. Hero Analysis for the Future number 13. Nezu began to read. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The tea on his desk went completely cold. A low, vibrating sound began in the back of Nezu's throat. It was a sound that made Aizawa Shota, whenever he had the misfortune of hearing it, break out in a cold sweat. It was the sound of Principal Nezu laughing. Incredible, Nezu thought, his mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. This wasn't the diary of a fanboy. These weren't crude sketches and power-level rankings. This was raw, unfiltered tactical deconstruction. The boy hadn't just listed empty lady's quirk. He had calculated her shift in mass-to-volume ratio, noting that her center of gravity was severely compromised when she grew, meaning a targeted strike to her left Achilles tendon during her transformation sequence would instantly fell her. He had analyzed Kamui woods, noting the exact humidity levels at which his wood-binding generation slowed down by 14%, and theorized a chemical solvent that could dissolve the cellulose in his branches. He had analyzed All Might, noting a previously unrecorded 0.2-second hesitation on his left side during his smash impacts, theorizing a hidden, lingering injury. He's 14 years old, Nezu thought, his paw gently tracing the jagged, hurried handwriting. 14 years old, possessing no quirk to speak of, and he has successfully engineered theoretical countermeasures for the top 20 pro heroes in Japan just by watching them on television. The world saw heroes and villains as a clash of powers, a spectacle of bright colors and brute force. This boy, whoever he was, saw the world as Nezu did. He saw a chessboard. He saw vectors, physics, psychology, and structural flaws. The tragedy was that society had clearly beaten the boy down for not having a piece to play on the board, completely ignoring that he had the potential to be the Grandmaster. Nezu closed the notebook. He looked up at the frozen image of the green-haired boy on his monitor. He looked so frail. So thoroughly defeated by the world. "Well now, Midoriya Izuku," Nezu murmured to the empty office, having run the boy's face through the National Middle School Registry in a matter of seconds. "It seems the universe has played a cruel joke on you by denying you a quirk. but I am quite fond of overturning the universe's jokes. Nezu picked up a sleek, black cellular phone, an encrypted line. He dialed a number he hadn't called in 3 years. It rang twice before a gravelly, annoyed voice answered. I don't do hits, rat. Lose the number. Good evening, Aguro-san, Nezu said cheerfully. Splendid form today in the Tatooine district. Your right hook is as brutally efficient as ever, though I do suggest upgrading the capacitor on those knuckles. They're leaking voltage. A heavy sigh on the other end. What do you want, Nezu? I have a proposition for you. An apprenticeship of sorts. I don't take students. I break bones. Oh, you'll be doing plenty of breaking, Nezu assured him, his smile widening, baring sharp little teeth. I found a diamond in the rough today, Aguro. A mind of terrifying potential trapped in a fragile, naive shell. I intend to mold him. But he needs to learn how to survive in the dark, and my expertise is purely academic. He needs someone to teach him how to fight dirty. How to survive when the monsters don't play by the rules. Silence hung on the line for a long moment. Who is it? The boy you yelled at in the alleyway. The suicide case? The kid with no quirk? You've gone senile, Nezu. He's weak. He's got a heart full of cotton candy and hero worship, which is exactly why you are going to beat it out of him, Nezu replied smoothly. You strip away the cotton candy, Aguro. I will forge the steel underneath. I want you to meet me at his address in 1 hour. I assure you, by the end of this conversation, you will see exactly what I see. Izuku sat on his bed, staring blankly at the All Might poster on his ceiling. The vibrant, smiling face of the #1 hero, which had brought him comfort every night of his life, now felt like a mocking caricature. Realistic. All Might's voice echoed in his head. Heart gets you killed. The vigilante's voice followed. His ma, Minko, had hovered around him ever since the police dropped him off, crying and fretting over the soot on his clothes. Izuku had just numbly taken a shower, put on a plain white t-shirt and sweatpants, and retreated to his room. He hadn't even checked his phone to see if Bakugo had texted him. Not that Bakugo ever did, unless it was a threat. He was done. Tomorrow, he would withdraw his application to UA High School. He would look into general education high schools. Maybe he'd take up accounting. Or data entry. Something quiet. Something where he couldn't get in the way. A sharp knock at the front door broke his spiraling thoughts. Izuku frowned. It was past 9 o'clock. Who would be visiting this late? He heard his mother walk down the hallway and open the door. Oh. Hello? Can I help you? Inko's voice wavered, tinged with polite confusion and a hint of fear. Good evening, Midoriya-san. A cheerful, strangely high-pitched voice rang out. I apologize for the late intrusion. My name is Nezu. I am the principal of UA High School. May we come in? Izuku's heart stopped. The principal of UA? Here? Panic seized him. Did the police report me? Am I being banned from applying? Are they going to sue my mom for interfering with pro-heroes? Izuku scrambled off his bed and practically sprinted down the narrow hallway, skidding to a halt in the living room. Standing in the entryway was the most bizarre pair Izuku had ever seen. One was a creature, a white-furred mammal in an immaculate suit, possessing dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in the entire apartment in a fraction of a second. Standing next to him, ducking slightly to avoid hitting his head on the doorframe, was the massive, scarred vigilante from the alleyway. The man had traded his trench coat for a worn leather jacket, but the terrifying aura of coiled violence remained completely intact. Inko looked like she was about to faint. Principal of UA? And oh my, are you a hero as well, sir? She asked, looking at the giant scarred man. The man grunted. Hardly. Nezu stepped forward, offering a polite bow. We are here to speak with your son, Midoriya-san. Regarding his future. Izuku swallowed hard. He stepped forward, his voice trembling. I am sorry. I know I messed up today. I got in the way of the pros. You don't have to ban me. I was already going to withdraw my application to UA. Withdraw? Nezu interrupted, his ears perking up. Oh goodness me, no. That would be a catastrophic waste of potential. We are not here to reprimand you, Izuku-kun. We are here to recruit you. Izuku stared at the small creature. Recruit me? But I don't have a quirk. A trivial detail. Nezu waved his paw dismissively. He walked past the stunned Inko, hopped up onto the living room's sofa, and patted the cushion beside him. Please sit. Both of you. Aguro-san, close the door. We have much to discuss. Knuckleduster shut the door with a solid click, leaning against the wall and crossing his massive arms, his eyes locking onto Izuku with a heavy, judgmental stare. Izuku and his mother tentatively sat on the opposite sofa. Inko's hands were wringing together anxiously. Nezu reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a familiar, slightly charred notebook in a plastic bag. He placed it on the coffee table. Izuku gasped. My notebook! I took the liberty of reading it, Nezu said, his tone shifting from cheerful to deadly serious. Izuku-kun, I have been an educator for many years. I have seen students with quirks that can level mountains and shatter buildings. I have seen prodigies of strength, speed, and elemental control. Do you know what I have never seen? Izuku shook his head slowly. Nezu tapped the notebook. A 14-year-old boy who can deconstruct a pro hero's entire combat repertoire, identify fatal physiological weaknesses, and devise perfectly viable, non-quirk-based countermeasures, all from watching compressed YouTube footage. Izuku blinked, his face flushing violently. It's just a hobby. I just take notes. It's nothing special, it's just mumbling. It is structural engineering. It is tactical psychology. It is predictive combat analysis, Nezu corrected sharply. Do not insult your own intelligence by calling it a hobby. You have a mind built for war, Midoriya Izuku. Society has simply blinded you to it because you cannot shoot fire from your hands. Knuckleduster scoffed from the wall. Brains don't mean a damn thing if a villain punches a hole through your chest, rat. Kid froze up today. He ran in without a weapon and almost got himself killed. He's soft. Which is why you are here, Aguro, Nezu said calmly, not taking his eyes off Izuku. You met All Might today, didn't you, Izuku-kun? Izuku flinched. The question caught him completely off guard. How did you know? I know many things. I also know what he likely told you. He told you to be realistic. He told you a quirkless boy cannot be a hero. Nezu leaned forward, his black eyes boring into Izuku's soul. All Might is a good man. But he is a fool. He is a hammer, and to him, every problem is a nail. He cannot comprehend a world where battles are won before the first punch is thrown. Nezu steepled his paws together. I am not offering you a fairy tale, Izuku. I cannot give you a quirk. I cannot make you the symbol of peace. If you walk the path I am offering, you will not be a flashy hero who smiles for the cameras. You will be a shadow. You will have to fight dirtier, think faster, and be more ruthless than anyone else in the room. You will have to become a terror to those who prey on the weak. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. He looked at Nezu, then at Knuckleduster. The massive vigilante wasn't glaring at him anymore. He was watching him closely, evaluating him. You have 10 months until the UA entrance exam, Nezu said, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. If you accept my offer, Aguro-san will break your body down and rebuild it into a weapon. He will teach you how to take a hit, how to fight dirty, and how to use the environment to cripple people twice your size. I, in turn, will train your mind. I will teach you how to hack security systems, how to read micro-expressions, how to manipulate your opponents into defeating themselves. We will forge you into a new kind of hero, the kind the villains won't see coming until it is far, far too late. The living room was dead silent. Inko was trembling, tears streaming down her face. Izuku, it sounds so dangerous. You don't have to do this. You can just be safe. Izuku looked down at his hands. They were scarred from years of Katsuki's explosions. They were weak. For 10 years, he had chased a ghost, praying for a miracle quirk that would never come. He had wanted to be All Might, but All Might didn't want him. The pro-heroes didn't want him. Heart gets you killed. Brains keep you alive. Slowly Izuku raised his head. The nervous, trembling fanboy who had stood on the rooftop hours ago was gone. Something else was taking root behind his green eyes. Something cold. Something sharp. He looked at Knuckleduster. You said I didn't have a plan today? Knuckleduster grunted. You didn't. If I had brought a weapon, Izuku said, his voice eerily steady, if I had used the taser on the sludge, would I have been right to step in? Knuckleduster's eyes narrowed. If you had the gear and the know-how to use it without freezing? Yes. You would have ended it before I had to. Izuku turned to Nezu. If I do this, if I train with you, will I be able to save people? Really save them? Without waiting for someone else to do it? Nezu smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant smile. Izuku-kun, by the time we are finished with you, you will be the one the pro-heroes wait for. Izuku stood up from the sofa. He felt a strange lightness in his chest, as if a massive, suffocating weight had finally been lifted. He didn't need to be All Might. He didn't need a quirk. He just needed to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless. He bowed deeply to the principal and the vigilante. Please, Izuku said, the quiet intensity in his voice echoing in the small apartment. Teach me how to fight. Knuckleduster pushed off the wall, a cruel, feral grin spreading across his scarred face. Say goodbye to your free time, kid. Tomorrow at 0400 hours, we meet at the Dagoba Municipal Beach. Wear clothes you don't mind bleeding in. Principal Nezu clapped his paws together in delight. Excellent. Oh, this is going to be tremendously fun. Rest well, Midoriya Izuku. Tomorrow, your true education begins. As the two strange mentors let themselves out into the night, Izuku walked over to the coffee table and picked up his charred notebook. He looked at the signature on the front, All Might's bold, sprawling letters. Izuku walked into the kitchen, opened the trash can, and calmly dropped the notebook inside. He didn't need it anymore. He had a new plan. The alarm clock didn't get a chance to ring. At 3:30 a.m., Izuku Midoriya's hand shot out from under the covers, his thumb depressing the button a full 30 seconds before the shrill beeping could shatter the silence of his bedroom. He lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. His breathing was slow, measured. Today was the day. The first day of the rest of his life. He threw off the covers. The air in his room was biting, a lingering chill from the early spring night, but Izuku didn't shiver. He dressed in silence, pulling on a pair of worn gray sweatpants, a plain dark green t-shirt, and his oldest, most beaten-up pair of red sneakers. He didn't bother looking at the All Might posters that still plastered his walls. Their bright, primary colors were muted in the pre-dawn gloom, rendering the symbol of peace into a series of distorted, grinning shadows. Izuku slipped out of the apartment, the lock clicking softly behind him, and began the 2-mile jog to Dagoba Municipal Beach. The city of Mizurufu was dead at this hour. The neon signs of the shopping districts were dark, the streets devoid of the bustling crowds and roaring traffic. It felt like a ghost town. For the first time in his life, Izuku didn't feel the need to look over his shoulder for bullies or villains. The darkness didn't scare him today. It felt like a cloak. When he arrived at the beach, the smell hit him first, a putrid concoction of stagnant seawater, rusting iron, and rotting garbage. Dagoba Beach wasn't a beach. It was an illegal dumping ground. Mountains of discarded appliances, crushed cars, and rusted machinery loomed against the pale moonlight like a jagged, metallic mountain range. Standing at the base of the largest trash pile, silhouetted against the dark ocean, was Ueo Aguro. Knuckleduster. He wore heavy cargo pants and a thick, sleeveless gray hoodie, his muscular, heavily scarred arms exposed to the biting wind. He was taping his hands with coarse athletic tape, the raspy rip of the adhesive echoing in the quiet morning. You're early, Knuckleduster grunted without looking up. You said 0400, Izuku replied, his voice betraying a slight tremble he couldn't entirely suppress. It's 0350. Knuckleduster finished wrapping his right hand, flexing his thick, calloused fingers. Good. If you're on time, you're late. If you're early, you're on time. Lesson 1. He turned to fully face Izuku. The man's eyes were like chips of flint, hard, cold, and utterly devoid of pity. Take your shoes off. Izuku blinked. My shoes? Did I stutter, kid? Shoes. Off. Socks too. Izuku hesitated, looking at the sand. It wasn't sand. It was a hazardous mix of broken glass, rusted nails, jagged metal shavings, and jagged seashells. But the glass will cut you, Knuckleduster interrupted bluntly. And it will bleed. And it will hurt. Take them off. Swallowing hard, Izuku crouched down, untied his red sneakers, and peeled off his socks. When he stepped onto the sand, a sharp piece of shattered bottle immediately bit into the heel of his left foot. Izuku hissed, shifting his weight, only to feel a jagged edge of rust scrape against his right sole. Pain is a neurological signal, Knuckleduster said, stepping forward. He was barefoot too, Izuku noticed, though the man seemed completely unbothered by the hazardous terrain. It's your brain telling your body that tissue damage is occurring. That's all it is. Data. The problem with you, and with 99% of the shiny, spandex-wearing idiots in this city, is that you let the data dictate your actions. You feel pain, and you panic. You flinch. You close your eyes. Knuckleduster stopped 3 feet in front of Izuku. If you close your eyes in a fight, you die. If you flinch when a villain swings a knife, you die. I understand, Izuku said, trying to ignore the stinging in his feet. No, you don't, Knuckleduster growled. But you will. Without any telegraphing, without a shift in stance or a change in breath, Knuckleduster threw a punch. It wasn't a full-force blow. If it had been, it would have taken Izuku's head off, but it was incredibly fast and packed the weight of a sledgehammer. The massive fist buried itself directly into Izuku's solar plexus. All the air violently evacuated Izuku's lungs in a choked gasp. His eyes bulged. His brain screamed. He collapsed to the garbage-strewn sand, his hands clutching his stomach as he writhed, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He couldn't breathe. The pain was blinding, a hot, radiating sun of agony blooming in his chest. Get up. Izuku coughed, a string of saliva hanging from his lip. He rolled onto his side, gasping, trying to suck air into paralyzed lungs. I said get up. Knuckleduster roared, a heavy foot kicking sand into Izuku's face. The villain isn't going to wait for you to catch your breath. The villain wants to cave your skull in. Get on your feet. Driven by sheer, animalistic terror, Izuku forced his hands into the glass-ridden sand. He pushed himself up, his legs shaking uncontrollably, his vision swimming with black spots. He raised his arms in a clumsy, textbook guard he'd seen on TV. Smack! Knuckleduster backhanded him across the face, sending Izuku sprawling back into the dirt. Izuku's lips split instantly, the metallic taste of blood flooding his mouth. Your guard is too wide. You're exposing your ribs. And you closed your eyes, Knuckleduster stated, his voice completely level again, detached and clinical. Get up. Tears streamed down Izuku's dirt-streaked face. Why? We haven't even stretched. I don't know how to fight. Exactly. You don't know how to fight. Knuckleduster crouched down, grabbing Izuku by the collar of his shirt and hauling him to his feet. So I am going to teach you how to survive. Right now, you have a romanticized idea of violence, Midoriya. You think it's a clash of ideals. You think it's two people shouting their ultimate moves. Knuckleduster leaned in, his scarred face inches from Izuku's. Violence is ugly. It is fast, it is unfair, and it is humiliating. It is brass over bone. It is gouging eyes, biting throats, and breaking joints. A man with a quirk expects a fair fight. He expects to use his power. You are a quirkless nobody. The only way you win is if you become a monster in the alleyway. You fight dirtier, you fight meaner, and you never, ever stop moving. Knuckleduster let go of Izuku's collar. Now. Put your hands up. Protect your chin. Keep your elbows tucked to your ribs. And look at my collarbone, not my eyes. Eyes lie. The collarbone tells you when the shoulder is moving to strike. Izuku wiped the blood from his mouth with a trembling forearm. He raised his fists. He tucked his elbows. He locked his gaze onto Knuckleduster's thick collarbone. Better, Knuckleduster grunted. Now, I am going to hit you again. Do not close your eyes. The fist came. Izuku saw the shoulder twitch. His instinct screamed at him to shut his eyes, to turn his head away from the impending impact. It took every ounce of his willpower, every shred of the desperation that had been building inside him for 10 years, to keep his eyelids open. The punch connected with his cheekbone. The world spun. Izuku stumbled backward, his heel coming down hard on a rusted bolt. He cried out, but he didn't fall. And he hadn't closed his eyes. Knuckleduster lowered his fist. A microscopic fraction of approval glinted in his cold eyes. Again. For the next 4 hours, Izuku Midoriya was subjected to absolute hell. He wasn't taught how to throw a punch. He wasn't taught footwork or grappling. He was simply taught how to take a beating. He was taught to exhale on impact to prevent his ribs from breaking. He was taught to roll his neck with a strike to lessen the concussive force. He was taught that when his body screamed to stop, he still had 40% of his reserves left. By the time the sun fully breached the horizon, casting a warm golden light over the mountains of trash, Izuku was a bruised, bleeding, trembling mess. His feet were lacerated, his face was swollen, and every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. "We're done for the day," Knuckleduster said, handing Izuku an ice pack from a small cooler. "Go home. Ice it. Wrap your feet. Tomorrow, you're going to start moving this trash. All of it." Izuku looked out at the towering piles of refrigerators, safes, and crushed trucks. All of it? To build muscle? No, Knuckleduster said flatly. To understand leverage. Muscle is useless if you don't know how to apply force. You're going to learn how to move objects 10 times your weight using fulcrums, pulleys, and structural weaknesses. You're going to learn how to break down a truck, which means you'll learn how to break down a man. Izuku nodded slowly, pressing the ice pack to his throbbing eye. He looked down at his bloodied bare feet. The pain was still there, but it felt different now. It didn't feel like a punishment from the universe anymore. It felt like a curriculum. 2 days later, Izuku found himself sitting in a vastly different environment. The room was located deep within the subterranean levels of UA High School, accessible only via a private elevator that required retinal scans, voice prints, and a passcode that changed every 12 hours. It was Principal Nezu's private sanctum. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves containing everything from classical literature to advanced theoretical physics to classified government dossiers. In the center of the room sat a massive, polished mahogany table. On the table, an elegant tea set steamed fragrantly. Izuku sat stiffly in a plush leather chair. His face was still sporting a yellowish-purple bruise from Knuckleduster, and his hands were bandaged, but he sat perfectly straight. Principal Nezu sat across from him, sipping his tea. He placed the cup down with a delicate clink. "Tell me, Izuku-kun," Nezu began, his beady black eyes twinkling with terrifying intellect. "What is a hero?" Izuku blinked. Someone who saves people? Someone who stops villains and brings peace." Nezu chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "A societal definition. Sweet, digestible, and ultimately flawed. Let us try again. What is a pro-hero from a tactical standpoint?" Izuku thought about it. He remembered his notebooks. He remembered the hours spent analyzing footage. A pro-hero is an individual utilizing a specialized biological function, a quirk, to enforce the law and mitigate collateral damage. "Better," Nezu said. He pressed a button on a remote control. A massive holographic screen flickered to life on the wall behind him. It displayed paused footage of the number 2 hero, Endeavor, wreathed in roaring flames. "Now, look at this man. Look at his power. Look at his presence. If you were a villain, Izuku-kun, how would you kill him?" Izuku's breath caught in his throat. His eyes widened in sheer horror. "Kill him? But, he's Endeavor. He's a hero." "I would never." "Stop," Nezu commanded, his voice suddenly void of its usual cheer. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Your morality is bleeding into your logic, Midoriya. That is a fatal error." Nezu hopped down from his chair and walked around the table, his paws clasped behind his back. "You wish to be a vigilante-style hero. You wish to operate in the shadows. To do so, you must understand the mind of the predator. You must become completely fluent in the language of paranoia." Nezu pointed a small paw at the blazing image of Endeavor. "A villain does not look at Endeavor and see a protector. A villain looks at him and sees an obstacle. And every obstacle can be dismantled. If you do not know how to kill the heroes, you will not know how the villains plan to kill them. And if you do not know their plans, you cannot stop them." Nezu hopped up onto the armrest of Izuku's chair, leaning in close. "I am not asking you to become a murderer, Izuku. I am asking you to become a scalpel. Strip away the costume. Strip away the reputation. Look at the man. Tell me how he dies. Izuku swallowed hard. He looked at the hologram. He forced his mind to bypass his ingrained idol worship. He looked at the flames. He looked at the massive muscles. He thought about thermodynamics, his quirk. Hell flame, Izuku muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. It produces extreme heat. But he's human. Human biology cannot withstand internal temperatures above 108 degrees Fahrenheit for long without suffering protein denaturation and brain damage. Endeavor must have an incredibly efficient biological cooling system, or he relies on the ambient air to disperse the heat radiating from his skin. Go on, Nezu prompted, his eyes gleaming. If he uses too much power, he overheats. He slows down. His motor functions would become sluggish. Izuku's muttering began to speed up, his eyes darting across Endeavor's massive frame. To kill him, you wouldn't use brute force. You couldn't get close enough. You would use attrition. You would trap him in an enclosed, heavily insulated environment, like a subterranean bunker with reinforced titanium walls. You pump the room with an oxygen-rich mix to encourage his flames to burn hotter and faster. You force him to exert himself. You deny him ventilation. Within 15 minutes, his own quirk would cook his internal organs. The silence in the room was deafening. Izuku clamped his mouth shut, horrified by his own words. He had just devised a flawless, brutal execution method for the number 2 hero. Nezu, however, looked absolutely ecstatic. He clapped his paws together. Brilliant! Exceptional! Flawless deduction! Nezu cheered. You isolated his greatest strength and weaponized it against him. That, Midoriya Izuku, is how you fight the quirked. You do not overpower them. You make their powers irrelevant, or better yet, lethal to themselves. Nezu walked back to his chair and took another sip of tea. Your physical training with Aguro will give you the tools to survive an encounter, but your time with me will ensure the encounter is rigged in your favor before it even begins. Paranoia, Izuku, is your greatest weapon. You must assume everyone in the room wants to kill you, and you must formulate 3 distinct plans to incapacitate them using only the objects in your immediate vicinity. 3 plans? Izuku asked, his mind reeling. Always 3. Plan A is your primary strategy. Plan B is for when Plan A inevitably fails due to an unpredictable variable. Plan C is raw survival, Nezu instructed. He waved a paw at the room. Look around you. We are in a sealed, subterranean office. I am a genetically modified chimera with hyperintelligence. If I decided to kill you right now, how would you stop me? Izuku froze. His eyes frantically darted around the room. The heavy wooden table. The ceramic teacups. The bookshelves. The ventilation grate in the ceiling. Your intelligence is your weapon, Izuku started, his voice gaining a cold, analytical edge he had never heard in himself before. You anticipate every move. So I can't outsmart you. I have to overwhelm your senses. I would throw the boiling tea directly into your eyes to blind you and cause extreme localized pain, disrupting your cognitive processing. While you're blinded, I would grab the ceramic teapot and smash it against the edge of the mahogany table to create a jagged weapon. I would then use the table as a barricade against whatever hidden defense systems you have in the room, while targeting your center of mass. Nezu stared at him. For a long, terrifying moment, the principal said nothing. Then he smiled. Good. Very good. You missed the kinetic dampeners hidden in the floorboards, but your immediate adaptation to extreme psychological stress is phenomenal. Nezu pressed a button, and the hologram of Endeavor vanished, replaced by a complex, rotating 3D architectural blueprint of a multi-story building. Now, Nezu said, his voice dropping into a rigorous, academic tone. Let us move on to structural engineering. If you wish to fight indoors, you must understand load-bearing walls. A quirkless man cannot punch through a concrete wall, Izuku. But a quirkless man who understands physics can place a localized explosive on a vital stress point and bring the entire ceiling down on his opponent's head. For the next 6 hours, Izuku didn't learn about heroes. He learned about tensile strength, shear force, blind spots, acoustic camouflage, and psychological degradation. By the time he left Nezu's office, Izuku's head felt like it was going to split open. But as he walked out of the gates of UA and onto the evening streets of Muzurifu, he realized something profound. He looked at the people walking past him. He didn't just see commuters anymore. He saw a man with a minor gigantification quirk shifting his weight heavily on his right knee, a prior injury. He saw a woman with a fire-breathing quirk wearing highly flammable synthetic clothing, a massive oversight. He looked at the buildings and saw structural weak points. He looked at the alleyways and saw choke points and ambush locations. The world was no longer a stage for heroes and villains. It was a chessboard. And Izuku Midoriya was finally learning how to play. The months began to blur into a grueling, agonizing cycle of physical torture and mental rewiring. Months 1 through 4 were dedicated to breaking Izuku down. At Aldera Junior High, the change in the school's resident punching bag was initially subtle, but rapidly became deeply unnerving. It happened in late May. Katsuki Bakugo, annoyed by a bad test score, slammed his explosive, smoking palms onto Izuku's desk, burning the wood. "Hey, Deku!" Bakugo snarled, expecting the usual flinch, the usual stuttering, fearful apology. "What the hell are you looking at?" Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't cower. He just slowly looked up from his notebook. His green eyes, once wide and brimming with unshed tears, were half-lidded, dark, and chillingly blank. In the span of a second, Izuku's Nezu-trained brain processed a terrifying amount of data. Kaken's weight is shifted forward, heavily reliant on his palms on my desk. His center of gravity is dangerously high. His left knee is slightly bent. If I drive my metal pen into the radial nerve of his left forearm, his arm will buckle. If I simultaneously kick his left kneecap, his leg will hyperextend and likely dislocate. He will collapse forward. I can then use the edge of the desk to strike his trachea, incapacitating him entirely. Time to execute, 1.4 seconds. Lethality risk high. Izuku stared into Bakugo's red eyes. He didn't say a word. He just evaluated him. He looked at Bakugo not as a childhood friend, not as a bully, and not as a future hero. He looked at him like a specimen on a dissection table. Bakugo felt a sudden, inexplicable chill run down his spine. The explosive teen actually faltered, pulling his hands back from the desk, thoroughly disturbed by the absolute void in Izuku's gaze. It wasn't defiance. Defiance Bakugo could handle. Defiance meant the nerd was fighting back. This wasn't fighting back. This was the look of a predator calculating the caloric value of its prey. TCH. Freaking weirdo, Bakugo muttered, turning away and marching back to his seat, feeling a bizarre, cold sweat on his neck. Izuku blinked, pulling himself out of the analysis. He looked down at his pen, realizing how tightly he was gripping it. He loosened his grip, returning to his notes on chemical combustion rates. His nervous stutter completely vanished by month 3. His incessant, muttered fanboying was replaced by silent, rapid-fire internal monologue. His body, once soft and frail, began to harden. Beneath his baggy middle school uniform, cords of lean, dense muscle began to wrap around his bones. His knuckles were permanently scarred and calloused from punching rusted steel at the beach. His pain tolerance skyrocketed. He learned that Knuckle Duster was right. Violence was ugly. During month 5, Knuckle Duster escalated the training to advanced close quarters combat, CQC. They were fighting in the pouring rain in an abandoned rail yard on the outskirts of the city. The mud was ankle-deep, slick and treacherous. Knuckle Duster threw a vicious right hook. Izuku slipped under it, pivoting on his left foot, and drove a solid punch into the vigilante's ribs. It felt like punching a brick wall. Knuckle Duster didn't even grunt. He simply grabbed Izuku by the hair, kneed him brutally in the stomach, and threw him face first into the mud. "You're fighting like a martial artist," Knuckle Duster spat, towering over him in the rain. "You're looking for clean hits. You're looking for honor. There is no honor in an alleyway, Midoriya. If a villain is stronger than you, you don't trade blows. You cripple them." Knuckle Duster reached into his boot, pulled out a heavy, dulled combat knife, and tossed it into the mud in front of Izuku. "Disarm me? No rules." Izuku slowly pushed himself up, wiping the mud from his eyes. He picked up the dulled knife. It felt heavy, cold, and entirely foreign in his hand. He looked at Knuckle Duster, who had drawn a second, identical knife. Come on! Knuckle Duster roared, lunging forward. Izuku panicked. He tried to parry the strike, but Knuckle Duster's raw strength batted Izuku's arm away. The vigilante's blade slammed into Izuku's shoulder. It was dulled, so it didn't cut, but the impact bruised the bone instantly. Izuku cried out, stumbling back. You're protecting your vitals, but you're treating your limbs like they're precious. Knuckle Duster circled him, water pouring off his scarred face. Sometimes you have to take a hit to give a lethal one. Sacrifice the flesh to secure the bone. Now again, Knuckle Duster lunged. This time, Izuku didn't try to block. Calculate, Nezu's voice echoed in his mind. Plan A, evade. Plan B, intercept. Plan C, sacrifice. Izuku stepped into the strike. He deliberately allowed Knuckle Duster's dulled blade to strike his left bicep. As the vigilante's momentum carried him forward, Izuku used his right hand, not to stab with his knife, but to grab a handful of wet, gritty mud. In one fluid, violent motion, Izuku jammed the mud directly into Knuckle Duster's eyes. The vigilante cursed, blinded, his grip on his knife loosening for a fraction of a second. Izuku dropped his own knife, stepped on the side of Knuckle Duster's knee, hyperextending the joint just enough to off-balance the massive man, and drove his elbow squarely into the vigilante's throat. Knuckle Duster gagged, stumbling backward and falling hard onto his back in the mud. Izuku stood over him, his chest heaving, his left arm throbbing with intense pain. The rain beat down on them. Knuckle Duster lay in the mud, wiping the grit from his eyes. He looked up at the 14-year-old boy. Izuku's eyes were cold, feral, and utterly merciless. Slowly, a jagged, terrifying grin spread across Knuckle Duster's scarred face. That, the vigilante rasped, coughing slightly from the throat strike, is how you fight dirty. Good boy. By month 8, Izuku's physical transformation was astounding, but his mental acuity had reached a level of frightening precision. Nezu had moved past theory. It was time for practical application of psychological warfare. The mind is a fragile construct, Izuku-kun, Nezu said, pouring a fresh cup of tea in his subterranean office. Villains often act out of a sense of grandiosity, trauma, or desperate ideology. If you can identify the core of their delusion, you can shatter it. A broken mind pilots a clumsy body. For his final exam of the month, Nezu led Izuku to a sensory deprivation labyrinth deep beneath the school. It was a pitch-black maze, filled with hidden traps, dead ends, and auditory speakers. Your objective is to navigate to the center of the maze and retrieve a glowing red orb, Nezu explained over the intercom. However, I will be actively attempting to break your psychological resolve. You have 30 minutes. Begin. Izuku stepped into the abyss. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind him, plunging him into absolute, suffocating darkness. He didn't panic. He took a slow, deep breath, regulating his heart rate. He closed his eyes. Vision was useless here and would only cause his brain to conjure phantoms. He relied on his other senses. He felt the faint draft of air currents indicating open corridors. He listened for the hum of electrical wires behind the walls to map the structure. He began to walk, keeping his hand lightly brushing the right wall. Izuku, the voice echoed from the darkness. It was Inko. His mother. She sounded terrified, weeping hysterically. Izuku, please. It hurts. Why aren't you helping me? You said you'd be a hero. Izuku's heart spiked. His breath hitched. For a split second, the little boy inside him screamed to run, to find her, to save her. Analyze, his mind commanded coldly. My mother is at home. She works the late shift today. Nezu possesses advanced vocal synthesis software. The emotional inflection is slightly artificially compressed. The sound is originating from a directional speaker 12 feet to my left, elevated at a 45-degree angle. A cheap parlor trick, principal, Izuku said aloud, his voice flat, echoing in the dark. He completely ignored the weeping voice and continued walking. You're useless. Bakugo's voice suddenly roared, right next to his ear. You're a quirkless freak. You'll never be anything. Just take a swan dive off the roof. Izuku didn't even break his stride. Kaken's vocal cords generate a specific raspy resonance when he shouts due to the nitroglycerin sweat subtly affecting his throat lining. Your audio file is too clean, try again. The maze shifted. The floor tilted, trying to disorient him. Hidden panels shot out bursts of compressed air to simulate physical strikes. Izuku moved like a ghost. He counted his steps. He mapped the maze in his head using an internalized Cartesian coordinate system. When a trapdoor opened beneath him, he didn't scream. He simply threw his arms out, catching the edges of the pit, and pulled himself back up with raw, corded strength. You cannot be a hero. The voice that boomed through the maze this time made Izuku stop dead in his tracks. It was All Might. The heavy, disappointed tone from the rooftop. You are a liability. You have no power. You are playing dress-up, Midoriya. You will die, and it will be your own fault. In the monitoring room above, Nezu watched Izuku's biometric readings via infrared cameras. The boy's heart rate had elevated. His breathing had shallowed. Nezu leaned forward. This was the core trauma. This was the psychological anchor that held Izuku Midoriya down. Let's see if he could break it. In the dark, Izuku stood perfectly still. The words echoed in his mind. They were the exact words that had destroyed him 10 months ago. They were the words that had made him want to give up. A slow, chilling smile crept onto Izuku's face in the darkness. You're right, Izuku whispered into the void. Up in the control room, Nezu frowned slightly. I don't have power, Izuku continued, his voice growing stronger, harder, resonating with a terrifying, absolute conviction. I am not a symbol. I am not a pillar of light. If a villain sees All Might, they feel fear because they know they are outmatched in strength. Izuku reached out in the dark. He felt the seam of the wall panel where the speaker was hidden. He slipped his callous fingers into the microscopic gap, applied leverage, and violently ripped the metal plating off the wall, exposing the wiring. But if a villain sees me, Izuku said, ripping the wires out and plunging that section of the maze into dead silence, they won't feel anything, because they won't know I'm there until their kneecaps are shattered and their lungs are bleeding. I don't need a quirk to be a nightmare. Izuku navigated the rest of the maze in silence. He bypassed 3 dead ends, disabled a tripwire using a discarded piece of his own shoelace, and stepped into the center room. He picked up the glowing red orb. The lights in the facility snapped on, blindingly bright. Nezu's voice came over the intercom, lacking any of its usual cheer. It was solemn, and deeply respectful. Time elapsed, 12 minutes and 40 seconds. A new record. Well done, Midoriya. It was the night before the final month of training began. Izuku stood in the small bathroom of his apartment. The door was locked. He had just finished a brutal sparring session with Knuckle Duster, followed by a grueling 3-hour written exam on explosive ordnance disarming by Nezu. He gripped the edges of the sink, breathing heavily, and looked into the mirror. The boy who had stood on that rooftop with All Might was dead. Izuku stripped off his sweat-drenched shirt. His torso was a canvas of violence. Deep purple and yellow bruises painted his ribs. A thin, silvery scar ran across his collarbone where a piece of rusted metal had caught him at the beach. His muscles weren't bulky like a bodybuilder's. They were dense, compact, and coiled like high-tension steel springs. He raised his hands. His knuckles were thick, the skin rough as sandpaper. He looked at his face. The baby fat was gone, replaced by sharp, defined cheekbones. But it was his eyes that held the most drastic change. The wide, emerald eyes that used to sparkle with innocent hero worship were gone. His eyes were now deep, calculating, and shadowed with an intense, unyielding pragmatism. They were the eyes of a soldier who had seen the ugly underbelly of the world and had learned how to carve a bloody path through it. He was quirkless. He knew that. He accepted that. A quirk was a biological tool. It was a crutch that made people lazy. It made them predictable. Izuku leaned closer to the mirror. Brain over brawn, Nezu's voice echoed. Brass over bone, Knuckleduster's voice followed. Tomorrow, Nezu had promised him access to the UA support course labs. It was time to build his arsenal. It was time to level the playing field. Izuku turned off the bathroom light, plunging the room into darkness. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. The monsters were hiding in the dark. But now, Izuku Midoriya was hiding there with them. And he was very, Very hungry. The digital clock on the wall of Principal Nezu's subterranean office glowed a crisp, menacing crimson. 02 months, 14 days, 8 hours, 12 minutes. That was all the time left until the UA High School entrance exam. The grand stage where thousands of hopefuls would gather to showcase their genetic lotteries to the world. They would come armed with explosions, super strength, localized weather manipulation, and engine-powered limbs. Izuku Midoriya would come armed with physics, paranoia, and a terrifyingly high threshold for pain. Nezu stood atop his mahogany desk, his paws clasped behind his back, looking at the countdown clock before turning his sharp, beady eyes down to Izuku. The boy sat in the leather chair opposite him, perfectly still. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't muttering. His posture was meticulously straight, completely devoid of the nervous tension that had once defined his every waking moment. The rules of the UA entrance exam, Nezu began, his tone holding a mixture of academic detachment and profound amusement, are inherently flawed. They were designed decades ago by a committee of pro-heroes who believed that flashy, destructive power was the sole metric of heroism. The practical exam is a simple destruction simulation. You destroy robotic targets, you accumulate points. It is a system built for hammers. Izuku's eyes, a hardened, calculating emerald, didn't blink. And I am not a hammer. Precisely, Nezu smiled, baring his sharp little teeth. You are a scalpel. You do not shatter walls, you sever tendons. However, the Board of Education is rigidly stubborn. They mandate the robotic adversaries. Furthermore, they mandate Article 7, Section 4 of the Examinee Conduct Code. No external weaponry, firearms, or lethal implements may be brought onto the testing grounds by the examinee. Izuku frowned slightly, a microscopic shift in his otherwise stoic expression. If I cannot bring weapons, my combat efficiency drops by 70%. Knuckleduster's CQC training allows me to disarm and dismantle human opponents, but striking solid steel chassis with bare knuckles or standard footwear will only result in severe metacarpal and metatarsal fractures. I need leverage. I need hardware. You are correct, Nezu purred, walking to the edge of the desk. If you walk into that arena with nothing but your bare hands, you will fail. The robots do not possess pain receptors to exploit, nor do they have psychological traumas to leverage. But my dear Izuku, you have forgotten the most important lesson I have taught you over these past 8 months. Izuku tilted his head. Read the fine print. Nezu clapped his paws together. Exactly. No external weaponry. External being the operative word. The clause was written to prevent affluent students from purchasing military-grade hardware to compensate for weak quirks. However, there is an addendum. Article 7, Section 4, Subsection B, equipment manufactured, registered, and authorized by the UA support course is considered internal school property, and may be utilized by an examinee provided they file the appropriate developmental paperwork. Understanding dawned in Izuku's eyes. A cold, dangerous spark ignited within them. You want me to build my arsenal here? I am granting you unprecedented, highly classified Level 4 clearance to the UA Development Studios, Nezu declared, pulling a sleek, obsidian keycard from his vest pocket and tossing it to Izuku. Izuku caught it effortlessly out of the air, his reflexes honed to razor sharpness by months of dodging Knuckleduster's ambushes. The support course students are currently preparing their own projects for the exam, Nezu continued. However, there is one student in the first-year applicant pool who has already been granted early access due to her overwhelmingly volatile brilliance. She lacks a tactical filter, but her engineering capabilities are peerless. She can build what you design. Together you will construct the tools necessary to dismantle the Board of Education's archaic exam. Izuku stood up, slipping the black keycard into the pocket of his dark cargo pants. What are my parameters for the gear? Non-lethal to humans, highly destructive to machinery, and completely unregistered on public police databases, Nezu instructed. You are building a vigilante's loadout, Izuku. Make it brutal. Make it efficient. Izuku bowed respectfully. Understood, Principal. Oh, and Izuku? Nezu called out as the boy reached the heavy vault door of the office. Izuku paused, glancing over his shoulder. Nezu's eyes gleamed with a predatory light. When the time comes for your final physical exam with Aguro-san, do not hold back. He certainly will not. The hallways of UA's support wings smelled of ozone, burnt copper, and intense, unregulated ambition. As Izuku walked down the pristine, reinforced corridors, his eyes instinctively scanned the environment. It was a habit he couldn't turn off anymore. Ceiling cameras oscillating on a 12-second rotation. Blind spot beneath the third air vent. Blast doors made of titanium alloy, triggered by biometric sensors. If I needed to breach this hallway, I'd need a shaped thermite charge applied precisely to the door's hydraulic hinges. He stopped in front of Development Studio 18. The heavy steel door was slightly ajar, and thick, acrid black smoke was billowing out into the hallway, accompanied by the sound of furious coughing and the frantic clanking of metal. Izuku didn't flinch at the smoke. He simply held his breath, pushed the heavy door open, and stepped inside. The studio was a chaotic disaster zone. Desks were piled high with blueprints, half-dismantled engines, and scattered tools. In the center of the room, a massive, bulky contraption that looked like a cross between a jetpack and a medieval torture device was smoking heavily. Emerging from the smoke, covered in soot and sporting thick, heavy goggles, was a girl with dreadlocked pink hair. She was holding a wrench like a weapon, muttering frantically to herself. Combustion chamber failed. No, the fuel-to-air ratio was too rich. The exhaust nozzle couldn't handle the thermal expansion. If I rebore the cylinder and adjust the intake valve by 3 mm, you'll create a localized pressure vacuum that will suck the flame back into the fuel line and detonate the primary tank, Izuku said evenly, standing just inside the doorway. The girl froze. She slowly turned around, pushing her heavy goggles up onto her forehead to reveal eyes with crosshair like irises. She stared at Izuku, looking him up and down. He wasn't wearing a UA uniform. He was dressed in dark, utilitarian clothes, his hands calloused and wrapped in athletic tape, his posture completely relaxed but inherently guarded. And who the heck are you? She demanded, marching up to him. She didn't have a sense of personal space, leaning in so close her nose almost touched his. You're not faculty. You're too young. Are you a test dummy? I requested a test dummy for my new baby, Izuku Midoriya, he replied, not stepping back. His heart rate didn't elevate. He simply calculated the optimal way to disarm her if she swung the wrench. Wrist lock, pivot left, hyperextend the elbow. Principal Nezu sent me. And your exhaust nozzle isn't the problem. Your center of gravity is. You've placed the primary fuel cells too high on the chassis. If a user actually achieved liftoff, the moment they lean forward to accelerate, the top heavy weight distribution would cause them to invert and crash headfirst into the pavement. Mei Hatsume's eyes widened. She looked at Izuku, then slowly turned her head to look at her smoking jetpack. She blinked once. Twice. Suddenly, a manic, terrifyingly bright smile split her soot-covered face. You see it! She shrieked in delight, dropping the wrench with a loud clatter and grabbing Izuku by the shoulders. Izuku easily absorbed the impact, his core tightening instinctively. You actually see the physics. The other meatheads who come in here just say make me go fast, or make things go boom. But you speak the language. She released him and practically skipped over to a pristine, reinforced workbench, sweeping a pile of discarded schematics onto the floor to clear space. I am Mei Hatsume, future CEO of Hatsume Industries and the undisputed queen of the support course. If Nezu sent you to me, it means you need a masterpiece. So, what's your quirk, Midoriya? Super strength? Telekinesis? Acid sweat? Tell me what we're working with so I can build the ultimate baby to augment it. Izuku walked over to the workbench. He looked down at the blank grid paper. I don't have a quirk, Izuku said, his voice flat, completely devoid of the shame that used to accompany that statement. Hatsume stopped. She tilted her head, her crosshair eyes narrowing slightly. No quirk? Zero? Zip? Nada? Nothing, Izuku confirmed, pulling a mechanical pencil from his pocket. My body is entirely baseline human. If I punch a steel chassis, my bones will break. If I fall from 3 stories, my legs will shatter. If I get shot, I will bleed out and die. I have no biological safety net. Therefore, my equipment cannot be supplementary. My equipment must be foundational. Hatsume stared at him for a long, silent moment. Most people would have offered pity. Most people would have told him he was in the wrong place. Hatsum leaned over the table, her grin returning, sharper and more intense than before. "Oh, this is going to be fun," she whispered excitedly. "No quirk means no biological interference. No weird sweat to account for, no spontaneous body temperature spikes to melt my wiring. You're a blank canvas. A pure, unadulterated physical vector. What do you need, Midoriya?" Izuku began to draw. His hand moved with blinding speed, drafting schematics from the blueprints Nezu had forced him to memorize. "I need mobility, crowd control, and localized, high-impact force," Izuku explained, sketching a pair of heavy, military-style boots. "Let's start from the ground up. I need steel-toed boots, but standard steel will dent and trap my toes upon extreme impact. I want a titanium tungsten alloy cup. Beneath that, I need the soles lined with a kinetic absorption gel layer. If I drop from a height of 40 feet, I need the boots to disperse the kinetic energy outward radially so my tibias don't snap." Hatsum leaned in, her eyes devouring the sketch. "Kinetic gel is tricky. If the viscosity is too low, it won't absorb fast enough. If it's too high, it'll feel like you're running in wet cement. I can synthesize a non-Newtonian fluid polymer. It remains flexible during normal movement, but hardens instantly upon high-velocity impact to disperse the shockwave." "Perfect," Izuku nodded, moving his pencil to a new section of the paper. He drew a pair of specialized, fingerless gloves, the knuckles heavily reinforced. "Next. A fence. My mentor taught me how to strike human vitals, but I cannot pierce armor. I need taser knuckles." "Boring!" Hatsum groaned, throwing her head back. "Tasers are so basic. Let's give you explosive gauntlets." "Boom!" Explosives run the risk of collateral damage and deafening the user in enclosed spaces, Izuku countered coldly. "I don't want flashy. I want brutal. I want the knuckles wired to high capacity, condensed microcapacitors housed in a forearm bracer. I need them insulated with industrial rubber so the current doesn't backfire into my own sweat. When I make contact, I want a localized discharge of 50,000 volts. Enough to instantly short-circuit a robotic motherboard, or trigger complete neuromuscular incapacitation in a human opponent." Hatsum shivered in sheer engineering delight. "Oh, that's nasty. That's a war crime waiting to happen. I love it. I can use exposed copper alloy nodes on the striking surface to maximize conductivity." "What else?" Izuku's pencil snapped the lead. He clicked it to extend more, his eyes darkening. "Mobility. I need to traverse the vertical environment instantly. If I am caught in an open alley with a ranged quirk user, I am dead. I need a grappling hook." He began to sketch a complex pneumatic bracer designed to fit under the sleeve of a jacket. "It needs to be wrist-mounted. Fired via a highly compressed CO2 cartridge. The line must be micro-braided carbon nanotube wire, thin enough to be nearly invisible in the dark, but possessing a tensile strength capable of holding 3,000 pounds. Hatsum studied the bracer, tapping her chin with a grease-stained finger. "Firing it is the easy part, Midoriya. The retraction is where it gets messy. If you fire a hook at a building 3 stories up and hit the retraction winch, the sudden kinetic pull will rip your arm out of its shoulder socket. Physics demands a toll." "I've calculated the G-force," Izuku replied, pulling out a separate piece of paper filled with complex algebraic equations. "The winch cannot be housed purely on the wrist. The bracer must connect to a reinforced Kevlar harness worn under my shirt, distributing the kinetic pull across my back, shoulders, and chest. It will still bruise violently, but it will keep my joints intact." Hatsum looked from the math to Izuku's face. She realized he wasn't just throwing out cool ideas. He had meticulously calculated the physical toll of every piece of machinery on his own fragile human body. He was designing tools for a ghost. "Midoriya," Hatsum said, her voice dropping its manic edge, replaced by deep, genuine professional respect. "You're a terrifyingly smart guy." "I had an excellent teacher," Izuku said, rolling up the blueprints. "We have exactly 2 months to build, calibrate, and test this entire loadout. We will need to construct stun grenades, smoke pellets, and EMP darts as well. Are you capable of meeting this deadline, Hatsum?" Hatsum grabbed her wrench, her chaotic grin returning in full force. Baby, I don't sleep. Sleep is for the weak and the quirkless. Oh, wait, no offense. None taken, Izuku said, taking off his jacket and tossing it onto a chair, revealing the dense, scarred musculature of his arms. Let's get to work. The next 6 weeks were a blur of blood, sweat, and burning metal. Izuku's life devolved into a ruthless triangle: the beach with Knuckle Duster, the subterranean office with Nezu, and the support labs with Hatsum. Hatsum was brilliant, but she was chaotic. Izuku provided the cold, grounding logic her inventions desperately needed. When she built the first prototype of the taser knuckles, she overloaded the capacitors. Izuku tested them on a thick slab of ballistic gel. The knuckles didn't just shock the gel, they blew it apart in a shower of superheated plasma. Too hot, Izuku had said, his right arm numb to the shoulder from the recoil. If I punch a villain with this, their heart will stop permanently. Dial the voltage down by 30% and increase the amperage to focus purely on the nervous system, not the cardiovascular system. When they tested the boots, Izuku insisted on practical application. He climbed to the rafters of the development studio, 40 feet in the air. Midoriya, the kinetic gel is theoretical. Hatsum had yelled from below, genuinely panicked. If the non-Newtonian threshold isn't breached, your legs are going to turn into bone dust. Then we find out now, rather than in the field, Izuku replied calmly. He stepped off the rafter. He didn't scream as he fell. His nezu-trained mind simply tracked the velocity. 32 feet per second squared. Impact in 1.5 seconds. Bend the knees at a 45-degree angle. Exhale completely to prevent internal lung rupture. He hit the reinforced concrete floor of the studio. The sound was like a cannon shot. The concrete beneath his boots spiderwebbed, a crater forming from the sheer kinetic force. The specialized gel in the soles hardened instantly upon impact, taking the brunt of the shockwave, then rapidly liquefied, dispersing the remaining energy outward. Izuku groaned, dropping to one knee, his teeth gritted. The shockwave still traveled up his shins, jarring his teeth and making his spine ache, but nothing was broken. He slowly stood up, rolling his ankles. Adjust the gel density in the heel by 4%, Izuku noted, his voice strained but level. The toe box took the impact perfectly, but the heel reverberation is too high. Otherwise, it's a success. Hatsum slumped against her workbench, clutching her chest. You are officially insane. I love working with you, but you're going to give me an ulcer. The final piece of the arsenal was the grappling hook. This was the most complex, the most dangerous, and the most vital to Izuku's survival. They tested it in the open-air testing grounds of UA. Izuku wore the heavy, restrictive Kevlar harness under his gray hoodie. The bracer felt heavy on his right wrist, loaded with a titanium clawed hook and 50 meters of carbon nanotube wire. Target the mock-up building, 4th floor balcony, Hatsum instructed over a headset, monitoring his vitals from a safe distance. Pressure is green. Winch torque is at maximum. Remember, the moment the hook catches, the winch will auto-retract at 60 miles per hour. Brace for the pull. Izuku took a deep breath. He aimed his wrist. He didn't just point. He calculated the wind resistance, the trajectory arc, and the exact tensile anchor point on the concrete balcony. He fired. With a sharp THWP crack, the hook launched from the bracer, trailing an almost invisible line. It sailed through the air and slammed into the balcony railing, the titanium claws biting deep into the concrete and steel. The sensor in the bracer registered the anchor. Retracting! Izuku shouted. He hit the trigger in his palm. Instantly, the high-torque motor engaged. The harness underneath his hoodie violently snapped taut against his ribs, chest, and back. The sheer kinetic pull yanked Izuku off his feet with bone-jarring force. It felt like being hit by a speeding truck. The air was ripped from his lungs. His shoulder screamed in protest, but the harness did its job, distributing the catastrophic force across his torso. He flew upward, the ground falling away in a dizzying blur. He realized with a sudden rush of adrenaline that he was flying. He was defying gravity. He wasn't relying on a quirk. He was relying on physics, engineering, and his own bruised body. As he rapidly approached the balcony, he swung his legs forward, allowing his new boots to absorb the forward momentum as he slammed feet first into the concrete wall. Flipping over the railing and landing in a perfect, silent crouch, he hit the release trigger. The hook disengaged, retracting smoothly back into the bracer. Izuku stood up on the fourth-floor balcony, looking down at the ground. His chest ached, his shoulder was throbbing, and he had a wicked friction burn on his wrist. He pressed his comms earpiece. Hatsum. The hook is fully operational. Ho! Hatsum Industries scores another flawless victory. She cheered in his ear. Izuku looked down at his gloved hands. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel weak. He felt armed. He felt dangerous. 1 week until the entrance exam. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the Muzurifu Industrial District into a desolate, gray wasteland. The abandoned chemical factory loomed like a rotting iron giant against the night sky. The air smelled of rust, standing water, and old decay. Izuku stood just inside the rusted chain-link fence, the heavy rain drumming against his dark, water-resistant tactical jacket. The hood was pulled up, shadowing his face. Beneath the jacket, the grappling harness hugged his torso. On his hands were the insulated, heavy-duty taser gloves. On his feet were the kinetic absorption boots. Pinned to a utility belt were 3 flashbangs, 2 thermite charges, and a handful of EMP darts. A heavy, battered black SUV pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. Principal Nezu sat in the passenger seat, sipping from a thermos of tea. Knuckleduster sat in the driver's seat, his scarred face illuminated by the dashboard lights. The vigilante looked at Izuku, his eyes devoid of any warmth or mentorly pride. Tonight, Knuckleduster wasn't a teacher. Tonight, he was the enemy. The rules are simple, Midoriya. Nezu's voice cut clearly through the rain via a megaphone installed on the SUV. This factory spans 400,000 square feet. It is structurally compromised, dimly lit, and incredibly dangerous. Aguro-san will enter the facility from the east gate in exactly 10 minutes. You have until dawn to either survive his hunt, or incapacitate him. If you try to hide, Knuckleduster growled out the window, I will find you, and I will break your ribs. If you run, I will catch you, and I will break your legs. The only way you walk out of here conscious is if you put me in the dirt. Izuku didn't say anything. He didn't nod. He simply turned his back on the SUV and walked into the yawning, pitch-black maw of the abandoned factory. He had 10 minutes. Most people would use that time to run as far away as possible. To find a dark corner and pray. Izuku wasn't most people. Nezu had taught him that the environment was the greatest weapon a quirkless man could possess. Izuku clicked on a small, red-lens tactical flashlight attached to his shoulder. He moved through the cavernous ground floor. Giant, rusted vats loomed like silent sentinels. The floor was slick with oil and rainwater leaking from the shattered skylights. Assess the battlefield, Izuku's mind raced, his eyes darting across the structural beams. Steel columns, heavily oxidized. Load-bearing capacity reduced by an estimated 40%. Ground floor offers too much open space. Aguro is massive. In a straight sprint, his longer stride will close the distance. I need tight corners. I need verticality. Izuku found a rusted metal staircase leading up to a maze of catwalks and processing platforms on the second floor. He ascended silently, his boots making zero noise thanks to the gel lining. He reached the second floor platform. It was a grid of grated metal flooring suspended over the vats below. He walked to the center of the platform and crouched down, examining the floor. He pulled a small, heavy ball bearing from his pocket and dropped it. It bounced with a dull, echoing clang. He listened to the echo. He analyzed the vibration traveling through his boots. The underlying support trusses here are severely corroded. The acoustic resonance indicates a hollow, weakened joint connecting this section of the grating to the main pillar. A plan began to formulate in his mind. A brutal, flawless trap. He spent the next 8 minutes rigging the kill zone. He carefully placed a small, concentrated thermite charge on the primary corroded truss beneath the grating, linking it to a remote detonator. He unspooled a coil of high-tensile industrial netting from his backpack, anchoring the corners to the ceiling rafters using his grappling hook to reach the high points. He rigged the net to a quick-release tripwire. With 1 minute left, Izuku retreated to the shadows of a control booth overlooking the platform. He turned off his red light. He slowed his breathing until his chest barely moved. He closed his eyes and listened to the rain. Boom! The heavy steel doors of the east gate were violently kicked off their hinges, echoing through the empty factory like a bomb going off. "Ready or not, kid?" Knuckleduster's roar vibrated through the rusted walls. "The monster is in the house." The hunt had begun. Izuku remained completely still. He knew Knuckleduster's tactics. The man used fear as a bludgeon. He was intentionally making noise, trying to provoke a panic response. He wanted Izuku to rabbit. Heavy, wet footsteps echoed from the ground floor. Knuckleduster wasn't sneaking. He was marching. "I can smell the fear, Midoriya," the vigilante taunted, his voice bouncing off the metal vats, making it difficult to pinpoint his exact location. "You think those fancy toys the rat gave you are gonna save you? Gadgets break. Flesh bruises. When I get my hands on you, you'll wish you stayed a quirkless nobody." Izuku's heart rate remained as steady, icy 60 beats per minute. Psychological warfare. He is attempting to exploit my prior insecurities regarding my quirkless status to induce an emotional error. Ineffective. Izuku waited. He tracked the footsteps. Knuckleduster was sweeping the ground floor methodically. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. Izuku opened his eyes. He looked down through the grimy glass of the control booth. Directly below him, standing in the shadows of a massive vat, was Knuckleduster. The man was completely still, his head tilted back slightly, sniffing the air like a bloodhound. "He found my trail," Izuku realized. "He tracked the water dripping off my boots when I climbed the stairs." Knuckleduster turned, his eyes locking onto the metal staircase leading to the second floor. He didn't say a word. He just began to climb. Izuku knew he couldn't stay in the booth. It was a dead end. He quietly slipped out the back door onto the opposite end of the catwalk. He needed to lure Knuckleduster to the rigged platform, but if he just ran there, the veteran vigilante would smell a trap immediately. He had to make it look like a desperate retreat. Izuku stepped onto a section of the catwalk that he knew would creak. Screech. "Gotcha." Knuckleduster's voice was suddenly terrifyingly close. Izuku spun around just as a massive, tape-wrapped fist smashed through the metal railing where he had been standing a second before. The sheer force of the blow shattered the rusted steel like cheap plastic. Knuckleduster lunged out of the darkness, incredibly fast for his size. He grabbed Izuku by the collar of his tactical jacket and hurled him across the catwalk. Izuku flew through the air, but he didn't panic. Exhale. Tumble. Disperse kinetic energy. He hit the grated floor, rolling over his shoulder, the impact jarring but non-damaging. He popped back up to his feet instantly. Knuckleduster didn't give him a second to breathe. He charged like a runaway freight train. Izuku raised his hands, activating his taser gloves. The copper nodes sparked with violent blue electricity. Knuckleduster threw a devastating right hook. Izuku slipped inside the guard, parrying the massive arm away, and drove his electrified fist directly into Knuckleduster's ribcage. BZZZZT. 50,000 volts discharged directly into the vigilante's torso. Most men would have instantly seized and dropped unconscious. Knuckleduster just grunted, his teeth gritting so hard they audibly cracked. Through sheer, terrifying willpower and a ridiculously high pain tolerance, the man ignored the electricity. He trapped Izuku's arm against his ribs, clamping down like a vice. "Good shock," Knuckleduster rasped, his face inches from Izuku's. "My turn." Knuckleduster brought his forehead down in a brutal head but aimed directly at Izuku's nose. Izuku jerked his head to the side. The headbutt grazed his cheekbone, splitting the skin instantly, blood welling up and mixing with the rain. Izuku's left arm was trapped. If he stayed in this grapple, Knuckleduster would break him in half. Plan C, sacrifice. Izuku intentionally twisted his trapped arm against the joint, dislocating his own left thumb with a sickening pop. The sudden shift in bone structure gave him the millimeter of clearance he needed to rip his hand free from Knuckleduster's vice grip. Ignoring the blinding pain in his hand, Izuku reached to his utility belt with his right hand, ripped a flash bang from its clip, pulled the pin with his teeth, and dropped it directly at their feet. "Eat flash," Izuku echoed the vigilante's words from months ago. He aimed his right wrist at a rafter high above, fired the grappling hook, and hit the winch trigger. Thwip. Yank. Izuku was violently ripped upward into the shadows of the ceiling just as the flashbang detonated. Bang! A blinding sphere of white light and deafening sound erupted on the catwalk. Knuckleduster, caught point-blank, let out a roar of pain, staggering backward, his hands flying to his blinded eyes. Hanging 30 feet in the air from his grappling line, his left hand throbbing in agony, Izuku evaluated the situation. Primary engagement complete. Opponent visually impaired for approximately 15 seconds. Minor auditory trauma. The trap is set. Execute Phase 2. Izuku disengaged the hook, dropping into a freefall. He landed heavily on the second-floor grating, the exact platform he had rigged. He hit the ground in a crouch, the boots absorbing the impact flawlessly. Aguro! Izuku shouted, his voice ringing out through the factory. He wanted the man to know exactly where he was. Down the catwalk, Knuckleduster shook his head rapidly, blinking away the afterimages of the flashbang. His eyes locked onto Izuku's silhouette standing in the center of the graded platform. The vigilante's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He didn't walk. He sprinted. The massive man closed the distance with terrifying speed, his heavy boots pounding against the metal walkways. Izuku stood his ground. He held the remote detonator in his right hand. He watched the massive predator charge him. Every instinct in his human body screamed at him to run, to fire the grappling hook, to get away from the monster. Hold, Izuku commanded himself. He needs to hit the exact center of the grid. Knuckleduster leaped across the gap between the catwalk and the platform, his fists raised, ready to crush the boy into the steel. 3 meters. 2 meters. 1. Knuckleduster's boots slammed down onto the exact center of the graded platform. Izuku pressed the detonator. Beneath the platform, the localized thermite charge ignited with a blinding hiss. At a temperature of 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, it instantly vaporized the already corroded, load-bearing truss supporting the center of the grid. The structural integrity of the entire platform failed catastrophically. The grating beneath Knuckleduster's feet simply gave way, groaning and screeching as the metal sheared. The massive vigilante's eyes widened in sudden, jarring surprise as gravity claimed him. He fell, plunging through the collapsing floor toward the ground level 30 feet below. But Izuku wasn't done. He didn't rely on the fall to incapacitate a man like Aguro. As Knuckleduster fell through the hole, Izuku kicked the quick-release tripwire he had rigged earlier. From the ceiling shadows above, the heavy-duty industrial netting plummeted downward. It caught the falling vigilante in midair, wrapping around his massive frame. The anchors held firm, and the net snapped taut with a violent jerk, arresting Knuckleduster's fall and suspending him completely helpless, tangled in steel mesh, 15 feet above the ground. Izuku stepped to the edge of the jagged hole. He looked down at the massive man dangling in the net like a caught fish. Knuckleduster struggled furiously for a moment, tearing at the high-tensile mesh, but the more he fought, the tighter the netting constricted around his limbs, binding his arms to his sides. Izuku activated his taser gloves one last time. The blue electricity hummed menacingly in the dark. He aimed his wrist at a steel beam near the net, fired his grappling hook, and swung down smoothly, landing on a pipe right next to the suspended vigilante. Izuku pressed his glowing, electrified knuckles directly against the side of Knuckleduster's thick neck. He didn't discharge the electricity. He just held it there. The threat was absolute. Checkmate, Izuku said softly, his voice barely a whisper against the drumming rain on the roof. His left hand was broken, his cheek was bleeding, and his body ached to its core, but his eyes were completely, terrifyingly calm. Knuckleduster froze. He felt the hum of 50,000 volts resting against his jugular. He looked at the boy balancing on the pipe beside him. He saw the cold, pragmatic void in Izuku's eyes. He saw the trap. He saw the execution. For 10 seconds, the factory was dead silent, save for the rain. Then, Knuckleduster's massive shoulders began to shake. A low, rumbling chuckle vibrated in his chest. The chuckle grew into a full-throated, booming laugh that echoed through the dark facility. The terrifying vigilante stopped struggling against the net. He looked Izuku dead in the eyes, and for the first time in 8 months, Iwao Aguro smiled. It was a jagged, ugly, deeply proud smile. "You little monster," Knuckleduster rasped affectionately. You actually did it. You used the environment, you sacrificed a limb for an opening, and you rigged the board. Perfect. Izuku slowly powered down the taser gloves. The blue light faded, plunging them back into shadows. He exhaled, a long, shaky breath, the adrenaline finally beginning to recede, leaving behind the throbbing pain in his thumb. The heavy factory doors on the ground floor creaked open. The headlights of the black SUV cut through the darkness, illuminating the dangling vigilante and the crouched boy. Principal Nezu stepped out of the vehicle, a small, elegant umbrella held over his head. He looked up at the trap, analyzing the sheared metal, the suspended net, and the positioning. Astounding! Nezu cheered, clapping his paws together. A flawless execution of kinetic redirection and structural sabotage. And completed with 4 hours left until dawn. Truly, Izuku-kun, you have exceeded even my highest calculations. Nezu pressed a button on a remote, and the winches holding the nets slowly lowered Knuckleduster to the ground. The vigilante tore himself out of the mesh, rolling his massive shoulders, entirely unbothered by the fact that he had just been bested by a 14-year-old. Izuku rappelled down using his hook, wincing as the landing jarred his dislocated thumb. Knuckleduster walked over to him. The massive man reached out, grabbed Izuku's left hand, and without warning, violently snapped the thumb back into its socket. Izuku bit his lip so hard it bled, refusing to scream, merely letting out a sharp hiss through his teeth. "You're ready, kid," Knuckleduster said, patting Izuku on his uninjured shoulder with enough force to stagger him. "Your body is hard. Your mind is sharp. You don't hesitate. Whatever those shiny, quirk-reliant idiots throw at you next week, you're gonna eat them alive." Izuku looked at Knuckleduster. He looked at Nezu. He looked down at his own bruised, bleeding hands, equipped with the tools he and Hatsum had forged. He remembered the boy who had cried on the rooftop, begging for a quirk. That boy felt like a stranger now. A naive child who had believed in fairy tales. "I'm ready," Izuku agreed, his voice echoing with a cold, absolute certainty. The entrance exam was in 7 days. The pro-heroes expected a generation of bright, flashy, powerful teenagers to step into the light. They had no idea what was waiting for them in the shadows.